call the Planning Commission to order at 6:37, sorry. Do roll call.
President Rosick? Trustee Carpenter?
Aye.
Dan Wicklund? Sangeeta Patel?
Here.
Leah Blankenship?
Here.
Tim Hansman?
Here.
Therese Klein?
Here.
Barbara Kylie Miller?
Here.
Eric Kudo?
Here.
This is meeting the notice.
Yes.
According to law. So the next thing on our agenda for the evening is the approval of the May 28th, 2019 minutes. Does anybody have any discussion?
I have one question, but no changes. For our agenda for this month, you said we're going to have a conditional use application for cellular antennas. I was just wondering what that is.
I can answer that now if that's appropriate. So they did apply, and then I reviewed the application earlier in the month here in June, and based on state statutes, it was actually a permitted use. So it was considered I think it's a class 2 co-location, and per state statute, class 2 co-locations must be treated as permitted uses. So they applied as a mobile facility, as typical, and then based upon the equipment they actually were installing. State statutes get very detailed in terms of if it's attached to an existing structure and if it doesn't add 20 feet or, I don't have them with me, but it didn't qualify for conditional use after I thought. So they had applied for it, we were scheduling it, and then we realized it didn't qualify. So Nathan confirmed, and it was not moving forward, so.
I'll move to approve the minutes of the May 28th meeting.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we'll move on to discussion and recommendation pertaining to updating the village's comprehensive plan in 2020. So Bart, do you want to start that?
Yep, thank you very much. So yeah, we discussed this last month, the concept of the village does need to update our comprehensive plan, and two options with a myriad in between, ticks were presented. On the simple update end, it was discussed that the village could just simply reconfirm the goals that are in the current plan and update the data behind them, and do some public engagement to make sure that everything's still current. And I had offered that I could probably do that with the hiring of an intern in-house with some additional mapping from our consultant. Or the other option would be to do a full-blown new comprehensive plan and hire a consultant to go outside to do that. And that would, essentially reconfirm all the elements of the chapters that are required within there. So there was some discussion of whether or not the Plan Commission had a recommendation of which way they'd like to see this go. The village board is currently in their initiatives prioritization phase. So last night we had a meeting where it came up briefly as well. They'll be discussing them again on July 1st and then confirming them on July 15th. So at this point, we're looking for a recommendation from the Plan Commission as to what range of update you'd like to see, just so that we know what kind of budget impact that request might take. Ultimately, it's the village board's decision as to what, to move forward, but we're looking for a recommendation here. So within this month's packet, I included just the snippets of, what's the elements and goals that are in there. So on page 13 of 89 through, 13 and 14, I should say, are the 6 driving elements. And so in my understanding of the comprehensive plan, these are pretty broad and generic elements that I think probably are still relevant, but I guess I'm asking just to confirm that with you guys in terms of what your understanding of is. So the first was to promote vibrant urban housing, maintain a wide variety of housing options that meet the housing needs of people of all ages and all stages of life in single-family homes, duplexes, condominiums, and apartments that are both attractive and well-maintained. So once again, a very broad vision that I don't know necessarily changes much throughout the years. And so 10 years ago this was adopted, that was one of the 6 elements. I won't read them all, but just from my perspective, these 6 are kind of very broad elements as to whether or not we need to fully introspect into those is kind of the question. And then each individual chapter also had goals. Once again, if we go to the housing one on page 15 in the packet, maintain a wide variety of housing options that meet the housing, so I kind of spread that one. Number 2, strive to retain and attract residents who value education, culture, and a high quality of life. And then 3, maintain and improve private property and public infrastructure to maximize assessed value of all of real estate. So once again, it's kind of broad goal themes that are out there. Then you go into the objectives, which kind of narrow down a little more, strategically what to focus on. So just if we go up to that number 3 one, minimize code and process impediments to maintain properties, promote ongoing single-family and duplex maintenance, encourage owner-occupied housing, and maintain attractive neighborhoods. So a little more specific, but still pretty broad. And then where the specifics come in, if you go to the next page, is where the village listed, you know, elements from previous plans that could be adopted or implemented. And so this is where the specifics kind of come in. And so my opinion, for what it's worth, is that the goals, objectives, and such as goals and objectives, goals and objectives probably haven't changed that much. It would be these specific recommendations that probably have, and how we've been proceeding at least on certain elements of the plan. And so transportation and parking is going that whole analysis this year. So within the transportation element, we're going to have a lot of these things already defined for us within this year's planning process. The CDA is also doing a housing, or they're expected to do a housing element, so once again, they're probably going to have a lot of these specific ticks in here. In terms of public infrastructure, we have long-range financial plans that document what our streets need, so not to belabor the point, but my take was, if the plan commission feels as though the overall goals and objectives are still in line with what the community values, I still think we could go on the narrower end of a budget request. And then with that, I also did reach out to communities. So Whitefish Bay is currently in the process of doing theirs. They're opting for the more, narrowed focused element. So I didn't get this until this afternoon, but their assistant village manager gave me the scope with which they bid it out on. And I think I did include the packet that they're roughly $23,000 for what they're hoping to do. And so just for what it's worth, their scope is a successful comprehensive plan should not only be compliant with state statutes, but should also be useful to village staff and community members. The proposed outline for the Village of Whitefish Bay Comprehensive Plan Update achieves an efficient and compliant document in a streamlined and user-friendly format, likely with a reduction of number of pages, encloses more detailed proposal. And then one paragraph I thought might be relevant. Note that larger and more physically complex Wisconsin communities requesting comprehensive plan updates over the last year have budgeted for fees ranging from $40,000 to $100,000 and over. Our assessment of the community, our knowledge of community matters, i.e. efficiency, and the village's intended use of this comprehensive plan update brought us closer to recommending a $20,000 to $25,000 line item in the village's 2019 budget. So there's one community for comparison, but they're very comparable probably to what we have in our code. I did also share, the city of Greenfield is currently just doing an update for $30,000 with a consultant. And then on the higher end of things, I found quotes from Sun Prairie. They budgeted $100,000 to do one, and the city of Hudson, a little further north, but comparable in size, $103,000. So I guess just from a staff perspective, so that we can take it to the village board during initiatives, this was kind of brought back to you guys to understand your, desire for what scale of the spectrum you'd like to see within the comprehensive plan update. And once again, it's a recommendation to the board. They'll be discussing it on July 1st and then confirming it likely on July 15th, with a budget request ultimately being approved during the budget process. So probably spoke too much, but if there's any questions or thoughts on that, I'm happy to provide any more assistance that I could.
So as it relates to the plan from 2011, what kind of review process has it gone through just to see where we are with regards to?
And I don't know, in my year and a half here, it has never been reviewed thoroughly or vetted in any sort of meeting or staff review. What typically I'll just say, because we have a lot of plans, what we typically most reference is the Vision 2025 plan. That does get a lot of discussion at staff meetings in terms of what of the 6 objectives it meets in there. I don't think these are necessarily far off from that, but once again, I think to the point of the comprehensive plan, ideally this would be the overarching document, but the village has a lot of plans, and so most often we reference the Vision 2025 plan. This one, once again, is a very broad net and it's got the specific things on there. It is on the older end of plans at this point, so maybe within the first 5 or 6 or 7 years, Erica or Chris or whoever might have been doing it was keeping more track of it, but I think the Vision 2025 plan was adopted in 2015 roughly, so that probably then overtook people's levels of what's the most recent plan. So I think the goal would be though to have this be the overarching document that the village board and all commissions and committees look at. So it is,
As opposed to the 2025, I know
yeah, this would, once again, this would be more current then. But I wasn't here for the history of why the vision plan came as opposed to just updating this. But I think, in my opinion, this would be a good place to keep all those main goals, housed.
So a plan that looks like this, is there a ballpark, is there an estimate on the cost for a plan that is similar to this in scope? Is this the 23,000, is this the 100,000, I don't know.
So, starting from scratch, this is probably the 100,000 version. There's other maps and things. This is just a selection of what's in there. So a lot of what those larger numbers include is community engagement and visioning sessions. And so if you're starting from scratch, each element is going to have probably its own public engagement meeting, whether that's through a planning commission public hearing or an event in the community. I believe Whitefish Bay's contracted for one, just to reconfirm what they had. So the bigger efforts definitely have more public engagement and more opportunities for input on those. I think, in my perspective, on the cheaper end of the spectrum, since we did that already, unless things have changed dramatically from what's been documented, I don't know that we're going to hear much different. And we are doing specific engagement on transportation this year. We'll be doing specific engagement on housing. The CDA is talking about doing a joint meeting with the village board on strategic initiatives, so that would cover economic development. So we kind of do the chapters in their own thing, but then we bring them into the overall structure of the comp plan.
Did anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think back, who was on the board when this was done and who's on the board now. Maybe trustee Mocker might be the only person. So, the kind of goals or overall view of what we should be doing may have changed quite a bit in the last 10 years. For example, there was a section about, the central district, business district master plan allows for buildings. They increased the height of buildings to allow between 4 to 8 feet. In the last 5 years, both before and since the mosaic was erected, a lot of people decided they didn't like such a high building on Oakland. And I don't really know what the thinking of the board is about that kind of stuff. So, there might just be some different philosophical issues about development, the current board. Last month, President Rozak seemed to say that in her professional experience, she found a lot of value in having a comprehensive plan. I did wonder when reading when we got to page 41, where you have all the implementation section, chapter, the recommendations, and it's all right, who's responsible for this? Village staff, but I thought we need a bigger staff. And I wondered when the board is coming up with the priorities for 2020, are these things referred to? Oh, that's right, we plan to do this and this, or are you kind of starting from scratch? And there were so many plans referenced in the pages you gave us. I thought it'd be really helpful to have, just like the village has an org chart for village government, it'd be helpful to have an organization chart for all the plans, which is the primary one, which ones come off of that.
And I think this comprehensive plan could serve that purpose by referencing all of them within there. Just for reference, the Vision 2025 plan is a similar implementation chart that shows, 3 to 5 years, who's working on it, et cetera. But adopting it and implementing it are two different things. So to Commissioner Kudo's point, if no one's referencing this,
right,
unfortunately, it has become the quote plan on the shelf, right? So in updating it, and just to be clear, I find great value in the comprehensive plan. I think President Rozak, was mentioning that last time. My bigger question is whether or not we think a $100,000 effort is going to reveal anything different from these main overarching goals. There's definitely some specific things that you mentioned in terms of land use. The land use map might say that we only want 4-story buildings, or we might want, something in a different corner. That'd be a specific point we could drill down into, just from my perspective. But
is there something in the middle between that just update the numbers and projects and start from scratch?
I definitely think there was something in the middle, and I think we're kind of doing that as we go along here anyways, because like I said, we're doing the transportation, we're expecting to do housing, and CDA and Village Board want to do a strategic session. So within each of those, outcomes, I would hope that we'd have the specifics to plug into the overall goals.
For reference.
Yeah. And to be clear, in the lesser versions, not to say that we won't have public engagement, or we won't have meetings to discuss it or review drafts. It's just that we won't have, 10 of them, to reconfirm what we have. What the Whitefish Bay example has is that the consultant meets with village staff and village elected officials to confirm their understanding of the current draft. Then they went back and they're gonna go back and update all the data within it, and then present the new data in conjunction with the previous elements. Then they'll, roll it out and say, this is the updated version of it, have public engagement to see whether or not that's changed, but it's not we're gonna have a 7,000 postcard mailing to discuss housing on, Wednesday, June 26th, plug for town hall tomorrow, right? But it's more of an all at one kind of thing. There's definitely ways to do it, and to your point previously about, we need more staff to do these things. I'll just be honest in saying if this is chosen as the big overarching effort, a lot of my time will be taken up with it, which is fine, but that means things like working on historic preservation ordinance, or updating the sign code, or implementing the transportation plan get complicated because I'm, doing other things. So in part, it's a lot of discussion about how the village wants to utilize my time as well.
So even if you had a consultant or an intern, it's still your time to supervise that person and make sure the project is.
And review monthly updates and things to it. So a consultant's great for getting things done, but ultimately it does come back to me as the planner and as the person disseminating it and the person implementing it to make sure it meets what we have. So I'm not saying that either option is good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just giving you the perspective of, do these goals and objectives differ wildly from what we think they are now? And how should my time essentially be spent? Once again, that's the board's decision on July 15th that we'll hear, but they are looking for a recommendation from the plan commission just to get your perspective on how you guys think the plan is functioning.
Can you remind me, sorry,
Okay, go ahead.
when did we write the 2025 vision?
I think that was 2015.
So 2011 for the plan, 2015, we're doing some major initiatives right now with traffic and housing and strategy. So there's a lot of that comes together. It doesn't seem like a full rewrite is appropriate. We have work in process.
I guess I was wondering, would the consultant be able to combine, since we have the vision plan and this, and we're going to be doing the housing and the traffic studies, could the consultant be charged with putting it all together and saying, here's where the vision plan doesn't match up with this plan, here's where it matches up, so eliminate that. You know what I mean? So if the goal is to get it down to one plan, I think and we're going to spend the money, it would be nice to just consolidate at this point.
And to that point, I've been proposing, me hiring an intern. We could also I could hire a consultant to do a lesser scale version. So that's what Whitefish Bay and Greenfield are doing. One is hiring Grafe, one's hiring Vanderwall, I believe. So they are saying, okay, consultant, here's what we've done for the past 10 years. Take this, consolidate it, format it into our comprehensive plan update, and then we'll, confirm that it's all in there. So that is an option that we could also, go with a consultant for a lesser budget amount.
Can I ask about the 2025 plan? Has it at the same level of review as the comprehensive plan? Or is it?
Before it was adopted, or?
No, but the goals that are in the 2025 plan, that were written in 2015, now it's 2019, are we reviewing the goals that exist? Are we where we want to be on the 2025 plan? Or is that plan similar to the comprehensive plan where it's kind of been shown?
See, we're not reviewing the goals, so the goals are just overarching, walkable urban vibrant community, but the specific things within it, we did review them last year prior to the initiatives, and then the initiatives kind of left off of there, so I would argue last year we did that process, and then we switched over through the village manager's direction, to work on initiatives as opposed to specifics within there. So it's not that they're not being covered, but they're not being, we don't have monthly meetings, so just for your sake, we have quarterly meetings with the village manager to discuss our work plans and our initiatives. That's what we check off on. I think the previous village manager would check off on the Vision 2025 plan, so it's just a different style and different administration.
Okay, I asked just because if we're gonna combine a bunch of reports or not, and just do the comprehensive, I'd like to see they're being reviewed and our, percentage to goals or whatever it has to be are being met appropriately. Otherwise, there's really no reason to come.
Yeah, I think the rewrite, whatever form it takes, will give us an opportunity to, reconfirm the plan that we're looking at right now, because right now we have multiple plans, like I said. So I think this will give us a good opportunity, whether we do a full rewrite or just a simple update, to document where those are, that we can have more regular check-ins with it.
A question, do I remember correctly that this one's required by law to be reviewed? The vision plan is not required by law, something the village came up with separately?
Correct.
So,
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, that was actually just what I was going to say, is that this one is required by state statute. And so, I think that that's sort of the direction that I would like for us to go, is to somewhat consolidate both of them together into, so we're not looking at two different places and what are we doing and where are we in the process. And I do think that that would also really help with initiatives, because as I was looking through, the thing that I'm most passionate about is, and was brought up with Trustee Maher, is historic preservation, and there's like one sentence in the comprehensive plan on that. And I know that that's pretty specific, but I think that that would also help trustees as we're going through and prioritizing our initiatives, is to have one document, one comprehensive plan that sort of guides us to what our initiatives should be, what path they should be taking. So that's sort of my thought.
Yeah, nothing precludes the village from updating this more regularly, right? So we're required to do it once every 10 years. So we adopted this in 2011, and then we did the vision plan in 2015. They very well could have chosen to just update this and maintain the one document format, but I was not here for the history of why they did something differently, So, but to that point, this could be more of a living, reconfirm it once a year kind of document to make sure we have it, so it is a guiding principle for all of us.
So if we choose the update route, I noticed like in the current document, it lists that there was a number of drafts taken to the planning commission, to other boards. Would that same procedure follow? Would there be any public meetings at all, do you think, or would it mostly stay?
There would definitely be some public meetings. It's a matter of how many, and what I would probably suggest at this time would be that, we probably do 2 chapters at a time and bring them to the planning commission, or bring them to whatever body wants to have a public hearing on them or invite engagement on it. But because it was a new process last year, I think, or 10 years ago, they probably did more than I would think we would need this time, once again. Or we could do double it. It's really a matter of how much we think, if we go with updating this document, how much do we think it needs to be tweaked? Or do we throw it out and start over? Then you're looking at probably more engagement.
Over the last 5 years, I have heard various trustees and board meetings reference the Vision 2025 plan, so that is like the village Bible. You can't, it's the justification for whatever, action is on the table. So if this is supposed to override that, I don't know, it just seems it would be nice to have one reference point that the trustees can go back to and other community stakeholders can reference that, yeah, this is the direction we want to be going, whether it's 2025, 2030, or whatever. Otherwise, so there's, goals in here, there's objectives, there's implementations, but unless there's like action taken, it's just like anything, like, you can have a goal, but if there's no action taken, it's just a dream. So you don't want to spend a lot of money at something that you're not going to really use.
Right. And in your opinion, if we were to sort of consolidate the 2 documents, would that be something we'd be able to do without total rewrite of the?
I think we could. For reference to, I worked in West Dallas where we had a comp plan as well. It was very similar in that it had very, general goals, objectives, and then the specific actions typically happened you know, based on a special plan or based on a, you know, alderperson's initiative or a budget request, right? So I think keeping it broad on overarching goals, and then that gives us the flexibility to still, you know, insert specific actions that will always meet up with those, right? So if historic preservation is, you know, a big, you know, initiative or push next year, I guarantee that's gonna meet up with one of these, you know, maintain housing stock kind of goals, and you say, yes, it supports the comprehensive plan, it makes sense. So I think in any version we get, whether it's a rewrite or a whole new one, we're gonna get a rather broad goal. I think the specifics are what make more sense, and I would rather incorporate what we already are working on into that.
One thing I'm really interested in is changing some of our existing zoning codes. Would that be part of this comprehensive plan? Would that be part of updating the vision plan? Is that a separate standalone?
That would be the land use chapter, for sure. So land use is driven by zoning codes. So within the land use review, it is on my work plan, and the plan commission put it on the initiatives, right, to review the land use, the zoning map in 2021, so, sorry, in 2020. So yeah, that would support, if the land use says, you know, maintain a main street quality, or if it says, you know, increase density, whatever it is, you make sure the zoning meets up with that.
Because, you know, maybe there are probably some chapters that don't need a lot of tweaking, maybe just some updates. And then there are chapters like land use that maybe want to.
And that is one perspective too, right? If the plan commission wants to give direction of, you know, we really want to see more work put into economic development and land use, or if you want to do that, and that's where then we can focus more engagement efforts on it. And if you say, oh, we did transportation this year, we did housing this year, like, don't spend a lot of engagement efforts on that, but spend engagement efforts on land use and intergovernmental cooperation, or whatever they might be. And you know, it's difficult to like think on the fly on that stuff, but generally this conversation is going is how much budget request are we going to put in, and how much effort are we going to go to it. But if there is specific chapters that you want the request to go to, we could get that detailed too in whatever alternate recommendation you put forward.
I mean, I would just say that, from what I'm hearing, between the existing plan, the comprehensive plan, you know, as sort of backbone, I don't see the reason to start all over, at least with a whole new consultant. So it would be more of an update, I think, and bring those two plans together.
Yeah, I agree.
I wanted to know, what does it require to meet the statutory threshold of like review? I mean, is it just that the village board reviews it and votes, or?
No, there, and maybe it was in the packet from last month, or maybe it didn't fully do it. So the Department of Administration has a website that, you know, indicates the level of what you need to do. So you do need to adopt a public engagement strategy that defines how you're going to update the plan. So that's at a minimum, you do that, and then you have to follow the engagement plan, and then you have to adopt it by resolution and submit that to the state. So, and maybe it was more than last month, but I think I might have copied it back over. So I'll just read it. So a link to the State Department of Administration's website pertaining to comprehensive planning was also provided. Of note, the page provided a brief paragraph regarding update requirements as copied below. Optimally, the local government would update all of the background information such as demographic data in the current land use map. It would also go through a public participatory process to evaluate all the goals, objectives, policies, and programs put forth by the original plan and update them as needed, as well as the future land use map. Yet a local government may also do much less to update its plan. At a minimum, the local government must go through the process outlined in State Statute 661001(4) to adopt the updated plan or re-adopt the original plan if it still meets the community needs. So at a minimum, you could say, yep, it's all good, let's do it. I don't think that's anyone's desire, at least it's not mine. I would like to have these data updated, right? So once again, it gives you the spectrum of what you can do. It's great to have freedom and right to make decisions, right? So that's where we're at.
So for what we would like to present to the board as a recommendation, does everyone feel comfortable with recommending somewhat of a middle of the road, not a full rewrite of the plan, but somewhat consolidating our 2025, Vision 2025 with the comprehensive plan. Does everyone feel comfortable with that? Is there-
I think I'm a little bit more curious too about the public engagement part, you know, what would be, or what kind of threshold would we want to establish for the public engagement? Is it just, you know, we get all this work together and then we kind of roll it out and get buy-in, or are you actually looking to confirm, you know, before you get too far down the road, that the major 6 categories or 7 categories are still the most valuable?
And I don't know that I have an answer to that, but I definitely would reconsult with you, you know, as we get closer along, because I mean, public engagement could be online comments, you could have like a, you know, an online participatory element, you could have a town hall, we could have a booth at the farmer's market, there's like, you know, whole, you know, options out there, so if we were to hire a consultant for a lesser update, I would want them to, you know, weigh in as what they would need. If it would be in-house, I would need time to develop that. My main questions would be which elements should we focus those engagement efforts on? Like I said, it feels like transportation and housing will be covered. Depending on what the CDA does, I feel like strategic economic development will have, you know, a good portion of it covered too. Perhaps we focus on land use, right? Because that's one that really doesn't get all that much attention typically. So land use and zoning might have a public engagement effort, but
You know, it's the kind of thing that gets attention when it's like too late. When the zoning was changed, maybe it was for this plan, there was a house on the east end of Capitol that had a big sign on their yard because the plan was to change zoning to, I think, 4 stories on both sides of Capitol. And there are, you know, some single-family houses on those corners. So that ended up getting taken out for those corners. But that's the kind of thing I think people kind of get upset about.
so yeah, I think based on the recommendation of not a full rewrite, depending on how much budget they give me to either hire an intern or hire a consultant, I think we can develop the public engagement strategy, and that would definitely come back to you guys as a first step of confirming that. I would think you could do much more focused efforts as opposed to a broad issues, opportunities, threats analysis kind of thing. I think it's more of a, we think we know what we know, just help us confirm some specifics on it.
I'm sorry if I missed it, but what's the due date for the 2030 comprehensive plan?
So it needs to be updated by January 18th, 2021. So it lasts for 10 years. And the penalty for not updating it, my understanding is at least what it was about 10 years ago, is that you can't adopt any new ordinances, because in theory, all your ordinances should meet up with your comprehensive plan. So if by chance, you know, we don't have it and we want to, you know, change our zoning ordinance, someone could legally, you know, challenge that and probably would very easily win.
Sure, that would never happen.
There's no lawyers in town.
Yeah, never happen.
Well, if that's the case, it does sound like this is more important than some, you know, than the master plan for the business district or the vision plan. If this is what ordinances are supposed to, you know, be grounded in.
Yeah, I don't discredit that it's important. It's very important. I don't want to be misquoted on any of that. It's just a question of the process of how we reconfirm whether or not this is still relevant. And I would think that a lot of it is still relevant, and I don't want to spend my effort and community effort on it just to reconfirm something that we already think is, you know, there. So that's, just to be clear, it's definitely important. I'm not discrediting that.
As long as we've got a red pen, we can take some things out that no longer apply, or again, the board wants to move in a different direction, or the community does.
So is this require a motion or?
No, it's just discussion, so what
And recommendation,
what would you like our recommendation to be to the board?
That's the chair's recommendation.
Well, I guess how specific do we need to be in our recommendation? Because I don't know if I have a good enough sense of whether an intern is right or a consultant, you know, even for a smaller effort.
Mhm.
You know, if our direction to you is that, yeah, we see this as more of a rewrite, more in the $25,000 range, and then, I mean, can we leave it at your discretion whether you?
Yeah, I would say in terms of recommendation, I'm really kind of only looking for an update versus a rewrite, and it sounds like update is good, and then if we want to do an update with, you know, public engagement or however that works, the board definitely will set what we can do based on the budget request. So I just want to be able to recommend, say, the plan commission review the current comprehensive plan and thinks that an update would suffice, subject to public engagement efforts to confirm, the current content. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, if that meets with what you're saying.
Yeah, I see a lot, sorry. Yeah,
I like the idea of incorporating the vision, aspects of the vision plan into this, because otherwise, I just envision, no pun intended, that the board will, in 5 years from now, be wanting to update that plan, and then maybe we can save the money and time doing that if we just kind of one overarching comprehensive plan.
I agree.
yeah. I think that looks like we all kind of agree, some consensus on that for the recommendation to the board.
Okay.
So is that enough direction for you?
I was hoping for a motion and a second and a vote, so
Oh, sorry.
just keep things official, so if someone wants to make a similar motion.
Well, I guess I could try to say that our motion would be for an update of the existing plan that would incorporate the comprehensive plan and be dependent upon public engagement.
Vision.
The vision plan, I was gonna say.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep.
We need a second.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion?
So that we're also doing a parking plan and a housing plan. So can I make an amendment that the comprehensive plan also includes the parking plan?
Well, it would include references to those.
Just say to include
All
existing
the-
planning efforts.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
Does that work for you, Crystal?
Existing planning efforts.
So we have a motion and a second.
I'll second.
I
a second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Thank you very much. Like I said, July 1st is the next discussion, and July 15th is the final discussion. Public is always welcome to attend those meetings.
So the next item on the agenda is the discussion of short-term rental regulations and enforcement procedures. So,
Yeah, at last month's meeting, President Rosick had asked me just to give you a brief update on this, so I did give the board an update back in, looks like April. So Airbnb kind of started emerging as a topic with some neighbors not liking how their neighboring houses were being utilized. So this is just kind of a recap of what the current regulations are and what we can and can't enforce. So the memo's on page 49 of the village board, nothing's changed since then. So the village does have a ban on tourist homes in its residential districts. However, the state statutes were updated in 2017, I believe, that prohibits a local municipality from enforcing that for stays of 6 days or less. And so if someone's staying there for 7 or more, we can say, no, you can't do that. It needs to be, rented out as an apartment or under certain lease standards. But for whatever reason, the state did change it. I believe it was based on some issues in Green Bay, I believe is where I think the origin was. So Nathan had confirmed that. So we do have a ban on it, but it's unenforceable based on state statute. So based on that, we've communicated to people that if you want to rent out your house for an Airbnb, you have to do it under these circumstances, and you must get a license from the health department. So when we do receive a complaint about a property doing that, I send a letter from the zoning office saying this is, you can't do this for 6 days or fewer. Did I get that right?
Or is it?
Yeah, sorry, I just realized I said that wrong. We can't prohibit it for 7 days or longer. We can prohibit it for 6 days or less. Yes, sorry, so.
That makes more sense. 'Cause
Cut that from the tape, let's start over. So you can't prohibit it if it's longer than 7 days. If it's shorter than 6, if it's 6 or less, you can prohibit it. So I send a letter saying you can't do this for weekend rentals, you can't do this for overnight stays, and you must get a license from the health department. So unfortunately, there are loopholes that people can find around that, but it's difficult to do. So based on that, village staff met and it outlined the enforcement procedures, standing operating procedures on page 57 and 58. And so what happens now is that if there is a complaint in a short-term rental, like I said, I send a letter, the health department sends a letter, and we both follow up individually. The complaints are investigated by the police department, so a police report is generated that comes to my office. If the police report documents a stay that's against the zoning code, I issue a citation and it goes to court. So We do currently have one of them going to court in July, so I'll know more about how that part of it plays out. So it's kind of a learning curve here on how that works. So that was the first step of what I was tasked with doing, is just documenting what we have and what we can do with it. The second step, depending on how all this works out, if it becomes a bigger issue or it's not an issue at all, would be whether or not the village wants to adopt more strict requirements. So we can't prohibit it, but we could require permits for it, we could require other regulations. The city of Madison is kind of leading the way in that regard because they have been more proactive in making regulations, but for example, the city of Milwaukee has not. So it's all over the board in terms of whether or not it's an actual problem here and what the regulation is hoping to solve. So I'm not sure if President Rosick intended for that conversation to happen here or when, but she just asked me to provide you an update with where we're at. And I guess if there's questions or direction, I could sure.
Could you clarify what a tourist home is? There's a difference between renting out your entire place or a room.
So yeah, unfortunately, our code, which uses the term tourist house, does not have a definition, but the state does have a definition of tourist rooming house that our attorney has said would suffice for the case of enforcement. So on page 57, it says, means any lodging place or tourist cabin or cottage where sleeping accommodations are offered for pay to tourists or transients. Tourist rooming house does not include a private boarding or rooming house ordinarily conducted as such, not accommodating tourists or transients, a hotel or bed and breakfast establishments. So the general, phrase of that is any lodging place offered to pay for tourists or transients is how we have been enforcing tourist house using the state definition of tourist rooming house.
So with this less than 6 day or less than 7 day prohibition, if somebody would say that you're an executive and you're in town to work on something at your company for a month or two, you could rent part of a room or part of a house.
For 7 days or longer, yes.
Right.
Yep.
Or you have an extra room, so you're gonna rent it to a student at UWM, that's fine.
Correct.
But it looks like no matter what you do, you have to have a license from the state of Wisconsin.
Through the health department, correct.
Okay, and so then the question is, do we want to further regulate it through through Shorewood's government and have another license?
Yep, so the main difference with, and I'm not an expert on this, but I have asked a lot of questions, so I'll try to remember what I can. So the city of Madison requires that you get a local permit to operate one as well. So you need a health permit and you need a local permit. With a local permit, it requires you to keep a guest log. It requires you, I believe, to have other certain things so that I believe you have to report who stayed and how long. So the permit is subject to all of these reporting mechanisms so that it's easier to enforce as to whether or not you're abiding by the regulations. So in talking with them, they've outlined it, that way that it's helping them to get a handle on what's actually happening. Is it really stopping it? I don't think so. And so it's turned into a lot of administrative work to follow on that reporting as opposed to stopping it because the state doesn't allow us to prohibit it outright. So it's just a matter of, it gets a better handle on how it's functioning in your municipality. And there's some minor fees that would come in with all those permits, but from my understanding with them, it's not really stopping.
Yeah, and it looks like if you're doing it through a marketplace, I'm not sure if that's the word they use, an Airbnb or a VRBO.com, that they must take care of the payment. So they'll take care of collecting sales tax and remitting it to.
Yeah, the other thing with that is the village does not have its own room tax, and so that just goes to the state. So in Madison, in Milwaukee, they're bigger places, they do have a room tax that will get remitted back to the municipality. Those funds are then tied to certain activities. I believe they're 75% must relate to tourism functions. So we currently don't have that. So right now, Airbnb, VRBO, whoever is taking the tax, sends it all to the state because we don't have anything local here to remit to us.
I was surprised in looking at those sites for Shorewood. Some of them, the east side also popped up, but how many there were, that kind of shocked me. And I think with the Democratic Convention in town next summer, it's the timing is good to take a look at this, because it's just like when you have a big golf tournament, Augusta or up in Colder, people that rent out their houses.
And so that gets to the point of, is it a benefit for people who live here to make a little extra money? Or is it a nuisance to the neighbor to have someone who doesn't live there? So once again, two sides of the coin, right? So,
There's no reason we can't do it.
right,
Well, and the one that.
with certain regulations, right?
The email that trustee Bachhorst forwarded, on both of those, Airbnb and the vacationrentalbyowners.com, the listing says it sleeps 18. And I don't know about you guys, but I would not want 18 strangers coming and taking over a house next to me.
See, I would need to confirm that with Nathan, but I do think that it's something that we could say, okay, if you want to do Airbnb in Shorewood, you need to get a local permit and no more than, 4 people can stay there. And I think you could do those things and then require that they document it. Once again, it's a matter of
For
enforcement.
a family of 6 or
Right.
8 years.
I'm not gonna be here at, Saturday at 7 o'clock to go door to door to make sure everyone's abiding by that, but it could require you to submit it, to you, and then you would know which ones are the, just a lot of reporting.
Well, and that's a part of the question too, is does the village of Shorewood have the staff,
Right.
to take on this?
So yeah, the first question that was kind of asked is this really a problem? And so we kind of put on a complaint basis. We do have at least one house that gets a lot of complaints. Two, one of them has, the other one on Lake Drive has not had a complaint since we sent the first letter. So I don't know if that helped.
Sorry, the other, the Ardmore one?
Yes,
Yeah.
so there's one in Ardmore that has complaints weekly. There was one on Lake Drive that used to have complaints, but since we sent the letter saying this is the procedure, we haven't gotten a complaint on that. Maybe that's just dumb luck, or maybe they listened, I don't know. But yeah, to Commissioner Kettingler's point, they're a lot more advertised on those sites than I get complaints about. So are too bad, examples enough to proceed with a code rewrite or not?
Yeah, I mean, my husband and I rented condos, but more in, vacation communities, Scottsdale or Hilton Head Island. A residential neighborhood. This just seems like a different story, and it kind of goes against what the Shore Police Department says, have block parties, get to know your neighbors, so if you think somebody's, a couple of years ago, people would be on vacation and their houses were broken into. But then, so say you've got a car to get 18 in some house on Lake Drive or elsewhere, and the neighbors complain and the Shore Police Department has to go over, what are they gonna do to enforce it? Are they gonna make people pack their luggage and go? There's the kind of practicality aspect.
Yeah, most
At
likely,
the time, what you do.
right, they get a zoning, citation. I would think we would have the ability to pull their permit, based on something like that, so. But once again, that's a lot of legal discussion that I would need to reconfirm and talk with Nathan and as to whether or not it's a priority. It's a great question.
This might be a solution in search of a problem in a lot of respects, except for maybe Ardmore, but I think it makes sense as a village. I don't know how long Ardmore's been going on, but that particular property has been an issue. But I would hope that we would afford folks more relief than just like, it keeps happening and keeps happening and you file a complaint, then you get a letter, and then another letter comes and it keeps happening. If there was something that you could do that was a little bit more immediate relief for these neighbors who are living through, this constant sort of turnover at their property. And maybe it's, you don't always have to do it, right? Maybe it is a letter, but maybe if it continues to happen. So, I guess it may not be a huge problem everywhere, but if you're a neighbor on Ardmore, it's a huge